Good morning, Melanie.
Good morning.
Now, I just want to check.
Does he really sit at the head of the table?
Somebody needs to be on mute, and I think I screwed her up.
Oh my God.
Well, there. So do you have any particular questions that come up for you from yesterday? Okay.
Tommy, I do have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, I have a comment. One of the comments that you made I really appreciate was not focusing on a problem for this problem's sake.
Yes.
I like that very much.
And what about that appeals to you?
Well, because sometimes the focus of the problem doesn't resolve the problem.
That's true. That's true. And I think the nature of our education and just our culture encourages us to be very effective problem solvers. And the only problem with that is that we can take that orientation into any situation. And if there isn't a problem there, we'll find one because that's a comfortable place to go. That is in complete contradiction to positive psychology, which encourages us to look for the solution or a way forward rather than dwelling in the problem. Now, there are times when solving a problem is essential, no question. But we need, I think, to be really clear about whether we're in a situation that requires a problem orientation, and we try as much as possible to stay out of that. Where it becomes a challenge for people in the course is if they have a role in an organization which requires them to function as mentors or managers. Muhammad Farouk, who is in our class and from Oman, is a senior manager in a telecom in Oman. And so his orientation would necessarily be to manage the problems that are going to arise in the telecom industry. And these days, there are many. My husband has been in that industry forever. So it will be a major mental shift for Muhammad, and maybe we can get him to speak to this. Muhammad, are you there? And so was what I just said about you, without your permission, forgive me, would that be accurate, that you have to have a problem orientation for a lot of the work you do? Yeah, yeah. So does it feel like a shift for you step from the mental models that you would use for all those things into this coaching mental model. Right, right. Perfect. That's right. Okay, that you've nailed it, as we say. So whenever you see something that helps clarify the difference between the problem orientation and the solution focus, which is at the heart of coaching, don't hesitate to bring it up, because I think it's not only for people like you that is really important, but we have a number of therapists, counseling psychologists in the course. And my experience of that world is that there is a certain attention to the problem that the client brings to the therapist session. And the value of the coaching model is that we focus on the solution going forward rather than the problem that comes from the past. I think there will be interesting conversations about this. And I'm delighted to hear that you've nailed the distinction so clearly. What difference do you think it will make for you and your organization for you to be able to work from this different perspective? That's wonderful. That's great. Thank you. I'm delighted to hear you say all that. Good. Okay. Time to get this show on the road. Let's see. I'm going to. So, good morning, good evening to everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Are there any questions from yesterday? I've just been having, I don't know whether you heard the conversation I was just having with Muhammad, but he certainly appreciated the distinction between the coaching approach to move to solution rather than the typical business approach of going to the problem. So that was very encouraging to hear that that's landed right from the get-go. So,
I had sorry, Tommy, I had a comment, and maybe you've already been talking about this, but just in reading the materials, it's actually on page 8, just in the distinction between therapy and coaching.
yes.
Under the nature of matter, it talks about how traditional therapy is a defined dysfunction.
Yes.
And I challenge that only in the specific wording, because I think that the word dysfunction is a loaded word with a lot of different meanings. And I think there can be a lot of therapeutic situations where it's not, the nature of the matter is not necessarily dysfunction. It's someone who's trying to gain some self-awareness or is, challenged with a particular element of their lives. So the dysfunction word I'm challenged with. And the other one was around how therapy is about the past. There's some therapeutic approaches that are very much about the present. One of them being Gestalt therapy, as an example, is all about the present. So the sensations and emotions within the present. So it was just interesting wording that maybe needs to be updated.
All right. And might also reflect the training. Talia has particular therapeutic training, and that may have much more of a problem orientation or a past orientation. I agree with everything you've just said there, Danielle. And so for everybody, particularly, it's extremely interesting. The stars align with this course time and time again. The number of you that function in that therapeutic world is going to add a depth to our conversation that I personally find tremendously exciting. So if you find that what you see in our text does not fit with your therapeutic model under the bigger topic of therapy, please send me a note or send Talia a note. I'm sure she'd be wide open to hearing what you have to say. And I agree, Danielle, with everything you've just said.
I do as well, Danielle. Thank you.
Oh, good. So if Maria does, then probably Steve does too.
He knows what's good for him.
Good. Curiosity, just quickly, you two, have you been subjected to a huge amount of rain out in Maple Ridge?
Just a tiny skip of snow.
Oh, okay.
But to get back to the nature of the matter, I also disagree that those who come to, to coaching are generally functional individuals, because then we would have to define what is a functional or a dysfunctional individual. Some folks that come to coaching may actually need therapy, so we don't know. So that's a little bit of a loaded piece there, as well as others in terms of. Yeah, I get the
sandboxes.
Right. The sandboxes, but the names of the sandboxes and the things that we're ascribing to the sandboxes may be a little bit different.
Okay, that's very helpful. And certainly my experience with therapy and therapeutic models is very much in the present, not in the past. So I would agree with you 100%.
And it doesn't mean we don't go to the past, right? It doesn't mean that we don't go there in order to understand how someone may have developed, their belief system that may be problematic in the moment. And that doesn't mean that someone who comes to coaching may not also gain some insight about how come possibly they, they are unable to sustain success. It might have something to do with their past. So there's nothing to say that we can't actually go back momentarily to understand their views in the present moment that may be based on the past.
I think that's
right.
Very coherent way to distinguish that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of our coaching model, then, as you apply what you learn to your current professional practices, you will do whatever you see is necessary. And I would just ask you to try to get clear for yourself the distinctions that the coaching world makes about the future orientation.
Yes.
That is our perspective. And the place where that will become really important is when you do your oral assessment at the end of the course.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. not to interrupt you, but that is why we're here, because of the future orientation, which I absolutely agree with and want to experience in coaching. That is why we're here.
Good, good. And I expect then that this will enrich your therapeutic toolkit. At least
Absolutely.
At least that is my hope. All right. Now you refer to the text, and I wanted to talk just a little bit about the text as we start today. But before we begin, welcome back, everybody. And are there any questions from yesterday? Hearing none, let's move on. I will do my very best. We ran a little bit over time yesterday, and I know that Maria and Steve had a meeting. So if at the end of the class we're running over by a minute or two and you have a meeting to go to, please send a note in the chat box to Bella. Bella is joining us as the teaching assistant. Eli, who was with us yesterday, can't be present for this course all the time because of his requirements as a master's student at McGill. So welcome, Bella. And we will get to know more about Bella. She's a graduate of our business coaching flow, and delighted to be able to be with us. I know that Anne is back today observing, as she was yesterday. Welcome back, Anne. Do you have any questions or comments from your experience yesterday?
No questions. My comment or my observation is, as you've already commented, Tommy, is just how wonderful it is to have the diversity in the group, and really, really deep experience that's lending some perspective shifts, perhaps. So thank you.
Okay, well, delightful to have you with us, Anne.
Thank you.
All right. So we have an agenda today. One of the things that you will have received from Ashna is a separate email with the architecture diagram on it. And she may have sent the STAR model as a separate one as well, which is a useful thing to do. I think I pointed out yesterday that one of the things that I have found extremely helpful is to copy. We burn up trees in this program, I'm sorry. To copy the architecture, to print the architecture and the STAR model and put them back to back in a plastic sleeve, a stiff plastic sleeve, so I can access them immediately. Because we refer to the architecture and the STAR model again and again, and there'll be particular things coming out of the STAR model today. Now, the other thing is the text. And yesterday, we worked our way through a significant amount of material, some of which was obviously a bit problematic for people. And we essentially moved through everything up to page 16, through page 16. I will try to keep a track for us of where we are in the material and where we are in the text. Some people like that tightening up. For other people, it doesn't matter as much. But the text, in spite of the distinctions between therapy and coaching, on the whole is extremely helpful. And there's way more to our subject matter than we could ever cover in class. So I talked yesterday about our shared responsibility as learners in this class. When I say, please make sure that you've covered those pages, do that. And then any questions that arise from that, we will try to deal with. And if we can't deal with them actually in the class, I will certainly get back to you via email. Bella and I were just talking about my email address. So that is Tommy, THOMI, strange name, I know, at flowcoaching.com. Tommy at flowcoaching.com. Sorry, I left out a word. flowcoachinginstitute.com. All right. So, going through the text, as I said, we worked our way through page 16. And on page 16 are the flow coaching principles. So that page summarizes a number of the things that we talked about: the systems perspective, the whole person, the importance of the communication, and thinking to the past and the future. In the coaching orientation, number 9, there is no such thing as failure, only feedback. I think our culture emphasizes failure, certainly the problem-solving orientation, and Mohammed and I were having a quick conversation about that a few minutes ago. So that problem-solving orientation necessarily looks at failure. I mean, there's a whole process called the after-action debrief, which is extremely helpful, where you go back and you look at what happened and ask yourself, well, what worked and then what didn't? So the world of appreciative inquiry, in which I've been trained several times, encourages us to look at what's really working and why and how we can apply that to the future. But that after-action debrief world, which comes out of a military model, is one that looks at a past situation and asks not only what did we do right, but what did we do wrong? Mm-hmm. And since it's an after-action debrief, then we're looking to the past. In coaching, we don't go there. Now, I expect in the therapy world, there might be a dance there. And this is not the place to go, or the time to try and get into that. We'd be here until lunchtime. And I really would like some breakfast within, I don't know, a couple of hours. So just be aware, and again, thinking of your eventual oral assessment to be future focused. And I will be very interested, I'm sure we all will be very interested to hear observations from the group of you that are involved in the therapeutic world. I'll just use that as a term to encompass everybody, at how you see our emphasis on future orientation applying or not to the work that you do, and where perhaps a bit of both might serve you well. And as I said yesterday, when we have more than one professional role, we need to be very clear to distinguish for ourselves what role we're playing, what hat we're wearing. And as long as we do that in practice with our clients, then we can change hats. There's nothing wrong with that. I joke about having a sort of a metaphorical hat rack in my office. But for the purpose of this course, please do everything you can to try to stay in coach mode, rather than problem solving mode, in future orientation rather than past. Now, does anybody want to make a comment about that? Because I don't want to harp on that, but I want you all to have a sterling assessment eventually. Okay. Now, one of the things I asked you to do yesterday was to look at the ICF Code of Ethics and best practices. Does anybody have any questions coming out of that? A, did you have time to do it? And B, did it raise any questions for you? Okay, hearing none, I'll move right along. So, as I said, we yesterday worked our way in terms of dancing with the text up to the end of page 19. And now we will focus on the elements of a flow coaching session, the architecture, which is the big colorful diagram, the STAR model, which is a simplification of that, but very helpful. We'll talk about that. And then we will move into the thinking / speaking, the verbal skills that are important for coaching. I will be interested to have the input from you in the therapeutic world, because I'm really curious about the recent training and how it matches or doesn't match with what we talk about as the communication processes. And if I say anything that you find contradictory or worse, insulting, please forgive me. I will put that up front. And don't hesitate to say, wait a minute, I'm not sure that I agree with you there. That might turn up in active listening skills. I'm not so sure. And the skillful communication. So let's move on. We have a whole lot of elements in what we talk about as a flow coaching session. And the coaching presence that we need to step into and maintain is extremely important. This is almost like an appendix in your text. It's on page 52. And the value of the way it's listed there and the reason that it's at the back of the text is so that if you want to, you can refer to it at any time. So coaching presence speaks to shifting our listening from the automatic way we listen so much of the time, and being very intentional as we step into the coaching role. Now, I expect that as therapists, you are equally intentional. But that has sometimes been a major shift for people. And I think depending on the pace at which you work, to step into that different presence might be challenging. For someone like Mohammed, who lives in a fast-paced telecommunications, big industry kind of environment, I'm curious, Mohammed, given any thought to how you intentionally, it's almost like changing hats in the other direction, where when you move from your role as managing and leading in this big organization to standing in coach position, what will you do to support yourself in doing that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Barbara, that obviously resonated with you. Do you want to make a comment?
Yes, for sure. The time element, I think, is important, and the buy-in is huge. We have the luxury as a therapist to have an hour session or sometimes two. I don't think that would be the case when you're coaching in a huge corporation.
I'm sure it wouldn't. Absolutely.
So you have to be very succinct, and I like the fact that you referred to this kind of mindset that I'd like to understand more.
Okay. So the mindset, thank you both for your comments. Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. One of the things I'll warn you about, everybody, is that I will often refer you to books that might not be on our reading list. And there's a book by Robert Hargrove that might be helpful for you in this regard, Farouk, and it's called Masterful Coaching: Extraordinary Results by Impacting People and the Way They Think and Work Together. So Hargrove's specialty is the application of coaching principles to the business environment, and trying to do that dance. And we had a student in our module 6, which is the advanced practice module, and he works for Citibank in Russia, and the whole concept of coaching, that whole concept of communication in that environment was totally foreign, almost to the point of creating hostility. And so the way he approached that was over time to create a circle of people, a fairly small circle, I think it was only about 6 or 7, who were interested enough in what this coaching thing might be that they agreed to meet every now and then to talk about it. And that was one of the ways that he worked to introduce even the beginning concept of a coaching culture in his organization. So it will be an interesting journey for you, Farouk, and Mohammed, and we will support you every step of the way. And I admire your courage. Okay.
Tommy, can I just add one quick point?
Of course, Stephen.
Coaching went through a big surge in the 2000s.
Yeah.
To the point where corporates not only hired many of externals, they started building their own internal departments.
Yep.
The reason why it went out of fashion is because it wasn't executed well.
I'm sorry, you were garbled there. The reason it went out of fashion was because?
Well, there's many reasons. I'll just say it wasn't executed well. So then you saw deflation and basically annihilation of these internal coaching departments for the most part, and then it fell out of swing. So it wasn't and isn't that people don't believe it's valuable. I'll just pause there, but I think you have to set the concept of coaching.
Yes.
So think about how to execute it better.
All right. Is there anything that you would just add to that, Stephen? Because I think that's really important. And it speaks to the coach presence. If we internally, externally, whatever, appear to be kind of fuzzy-minded and woo-woo, we will have no credibility inside an organization. I was doing a big coaching assignment with a colleague. She was a mining engineer, thankfully, I'm not, for a major mining company in Vancouver. And that was an uphill slog, because the questions we were asking, trying to identify some cultural abysses in that corporation, we were at times just met with total bafflement. Why would we even care? So it's a different world. do you want to add anything to that, Stephen? Because I think you've nailed something very important.
I'm cautious to send the whole group on a tangent. So respectfully, I'll just simply say that there's a fallacy that we don't have time. I've done, strategy and information consulting for a long time at many levels. And I have yet to start a conversation that didn't involve people issues. And I have yet to start a conversation where it started something like, there are people issues and the problem is me, or I'm a part of the problem.
Okay.
So I think that seeds the lack of awareness. And I believe the program here does a great job of addressing the issue. So I'm not sure I have anything value add right now for the group beyond that.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. And please don't hesitate to add comments, because one of the things that's really important to us is we at Flow work apart from our instructional roles. We work in corporations, and it's extremely important that we have a very professional bottom line presence there. And so connecting the dots between our approach and the bottom line of the corporation, which always sits under the clock, is an extremely important skill for us all to sort of have in our pockets. And that leads to methodology and communication skills. And some of these communication skills, you might say, well, in the environment where I work, that just isn't an issue. Remember that the content of our program has to be an umbrella for quite a wide variety of student participants. And I think that's one of its rich characteristics. But if there's an emphasis on a communication piece that in your environment is absolutely not going to fly, just flag it. That's fine. I think there'll be enough that do land that we don't need to be concerned about that. In fact, opening space for integral experience is probably something that lands in the therapeutic world very clearly. And it would be, have to have a totally different focus. If when I work with leaders in the corporate environment, it's all about getting things done and getting them done well. So the elements, are there any other comments that or questions that people have before we move on?
Tommy, if I might just ask, I've just been listening to a lot of the comments that are coming out, and I think some people have got more experience in the coaching side of things. So with my background being management, business consulting on a process control side, I'm just battling to kind of see the types of questions, the types of issues that are going to be arising, and what are the kind of questions that coaches are being asked to assist in resolving.
I think that will become clearer, Rob, before our session this morning is completed. And I would encourage you and Muhammad to have conversations together and to share the insights that come out of those, because I don't think I've had a single class that has had the rich variety and the deep experience altogether as this one. That the challenge is going to be managing our time. The opportunity is going to be really expanding our horizons. And so please speak up when you want some exploration of the linkage between what we're talking about and your own environment. And I really hear that your environment is a different place. Does that address your concern, Rob?
I'll wait. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So coaching presence, the be do have is at the back of the book. And the only thing, and it actually speaks to this very conversation, when we play a number of roles, I doubt, for example, that any of our therapeutic community in this class need to make such a major shift between whatever they've been doing into the therapeutic session. Where it is a challenge is when any of us are working in a fairly time-driven, high-powered, results-oriented environment, and then we need to put on our coaching hats. We are changing our personas at that point. And we're also potentially, maybe undermining our credibility in the organization if the organization is only interested in its view of how to get to the bottom line. So being able to make that shift is really important. And one of the places that I know it becomes challenging for people is in the whole communication piece, which is where we're going with this class. And so let me say right up front that there is an emphasis on a softer style of communication in the flow model that may or may not fit your actual practice experience, depending upon the culture in which you're working. And I have watched a number of students, first of all, be challenged by this dance of being very direct or being a little more gentle. And I think there's room for both. But what you will do is develop your own style. And again, when it comes to feedback for your oral assessment, I just ask you to try to hold on to some of the gentler kinds of communication processes and skills that we talk about as part of the coaching experience, knowing full well that there are situations and coaches. I had a big compliment some years ago when somebody came to me and said, I understand you can be a real kick-ass coach. I went, what? And he said, yep. And that's exactly what we need around here. And so indeed, that's what they needed. And it was exhilarating work, but the pace was phenomenal. And for those of you in that kind of environment, you'll find your way to that. And we'll support you 100%. So that look at the be do have, and just know particularly your environment. Oh, it's lovely. It's snowing again. That you may need to encourage yourself to step out of whatever role you've been playing into your coach role and stop and take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm now in coach. I am not being directive. I am not mentoring this situation. I am not being a consultant. I am in partnership with this person as together we chart a course for the future to address whatever this situation is. And that's the role that I'm standing in right now. And that can become really challenging if you're working with high pressure deadlines. So find your own process. I have mental and physical processes that I use that don't take more than a couple of minutes, that just get me grounded in a different place, so that I can be focused on what I'm there to do. Now, are there any comments or questions about that? Okay, so coach presence, create your own. And that can be very exciting for people. And so we'll do questions and listening and other effective communication skills. And move on from there. And so by the time we have finished today, we will be through page 24. I will, as best as I can, dance back and forth between the text pages and our class time. My suggestion would be to, as much as possible, become sufficiently familiar with the content and the flow, in quotation marks, of the text, so that when you want clarification around the content of our program, you know where to go to find it. And as has been identified, if you, particularly in the therapeutic world, don't totally agree, I think our conversation with Talia could be very, very interesting. I might even try and invite her to come and I've got a better idea. Invite you all to be part of a webinar. And yes, write that down, Tommy, so you don't forget.
I just want to add something that,
Yeah.
that relates back to what you said a little while back is, you know, there's the idea of getting your own coaching presence and language. And also along with the wearing the many hats in a session, whether it's a modeling hat or therapeutic hat. I just recently have been wearing a therapeutic hat with some training with clients. And yesterday I, for fun, tried to put on my coach hat just very briefly. And, you know, by the end of the hour, I could tell that my client was confused. And it was interesting to see perhaps that was due to my lack of clarity a little bit, but I think it's an interesting thing to be aware of is that when you're doing one approach, I think there's a lot more clarity than when you're doing several approaches. So it is a dance, and that's why I thought when you mentioned a dance, the dance has to work for you, but it mostly has to work for the client.
Absolutely.
So, well,
Yeah. Thank you for that observation. I hope you will have the courage to try that shift again and see what result comes up for you. Could I ask all of you that are in the therapeutic world, and that's just my umbrella term, do you have any comment or observation in response to Danielle's experience?
Could I comment?
Of course, Barbara.
Yeah, I really I feel for the shift. It can be confusing. I think it's very important as the therapist to be grounded, to be kind of like a navigator for sure, and that just wearing one hat at a time is very important. I think if we're clear, then even if the client is unsure, there's always that rod, that rooting, that groundingness that can support the therapy.
Okay.
Or the coaching.
Yeah. I think what I'm having asked the question, I'm going to step back because we're going to look at the STAR model and the coaching architecture. And it will be perhaps through that lens that the bridge between the therapeutic approach and the coaching approach may become clearer for you. And as professionals, you will do what you know needs to be done in the service of your clients. And that's really important. And then I'll go back again to say, for the purpose of your certification in this program, your ability to demonstrate a coaching model, a coaching approach, and coaching communication will be really important. So look at it as a place that will give you a deeper toolkit, and you will have the opportunity and requirement to dance between the two. I think it'll make you even more effective than I think you already are. You're a pretty impressive bunch. So there we have the elements from a bird's eye view of a flow coaching session, stepping into coaching presence and looking at all the pieces of that. The way we ask questions and the way we listen is extremely important. And I'm sure that is identical. Well, maybe not identical, but very similar in the coaching world, the management world, and the therapeutic world. The difference would be that in the management world that Stephen has mentioned and that Rob lives in, and Mohammed, there would be an expectation of for a pace and bluntness, maybe, that might not land at all in a coaching session. So this whole field of communication is huge. Mm-hmm. And the important thing for us is to have as deep a toolkit as we can possibly construct, and to analyze the situation in which we find ourselves in lightning speed and determine what is needed here. Now, typically, someone in a coaching practice would carry on that question to themselves: what is needed here in the best service of my client? And that probably is true in the therapeutic world. For Rob and the comments that Stephen has given us, and for Mohammed, there will also be what is needed here in the service of this organization, because that's your role. And that makes a very, very interesting dance. I had one student say, I'm becoming positively schizophrenic as a result of this program. And I said, well, I hoped that was going to have value in the long run. He said, so do I. So here we are. We will address the coaching agreement and goal setting, and we will try to hold space. Again, this is a piece that applies in some situations. The space in the high pressure corporate world is going to be a much smaller space than in a therapeutic world, or somebody doing, say, leadership coaching. When I'm doing executive coaching, that's a very small space, unless I've earned the right to make it a little bigger. I mean, my executive clients haven't been remotely concerned about mind, body, soul connection. They would think that was absurd. And what is common all the way through, I believe, is the focus on designing actions for the future. So let me ask the therapist among us, this future orientation of designing action so that the client leaves your session with a commitment to do something. Is that part of your experience, or is that totally outside of the therapeutic models that you use?
It's hard to find.
So Steve put his I don't know. I don't know quite what that means, Steve.
Well, I put my thumb up, and then I realized you said, do you want coffee or tea? And I said yes. So
I
yes.
share my coffee with you, but there's not much left in the mug. Sorry.
Mine either. Yes, homework is an integral part of Maria and my practice.
Good.
Action steps, because 1 hour in an office per week is not where the traction happens. That's out in your life and in your world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, good.
It's also part of how we address the life difficulties that clients bring to us, is by having those action steps. It's not just the cognitive understanding or emotional awareness of where they are in their process, but to take steps beyond their comfort zone as they can, right? That's really what lands that change. And so we're all about that. And so that's why coaching also feels like it fits for us.
Good.
but we want to expand our awareness of how to do that in a way that's integrated into our practice, as opposed to just having coaching or just having, therapeutic clients. We would like to integrate the coaching more, but I understand what you're saying, not but and I understand what you're saying, that initially we will have to do the coaching before we know how to integrate both seamlessly into our process.
Okay. So, funny you should ask. Here is my favorite piece of our entire program, our coaching architecture, because it holds all of the particular skills under effective communication, tone, how we listen, posture, pace, rhythm, everything. Some of these will land for you when it comes to things like verbal softeners and voice tone. The corporate world kind of is not a place for that very much. So you take what for the work that you do, always bearing in mind that you need to do this oral assessment. Because what we try to do is to hold a big container for the different kinds of coaching that we're called for. In coaching, we're very concerned about not only the long-term goal, but the best result for the session. And so this question at the beginning of a coaching session is all around, what is it that you want to change, accomplish, the purpose that you have in having this conversation. So that's the future orientation, and that's the edge that is part of effective coaching. And that's where I think there's the possibility of strong linkage for people like Rob and Muhammad and anybody functioning in the business world. Get clear on that, and you're standing in that results orientation that is so essential in contemporary business. And unless we've got that, the rest of it is just a nice conversation. So we've got to have, what are we here for? What do you need? What do you want to change? How will you know that this hour or half hour that we've spent together has been worth your time? It's extremely important that we get clarity on that. And so there are some, what do you want? The flow principles that we've already talked about. I'm sure you're all familiar with SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And those become more or less important depending on the situation that you're dealing with your client. I would expect that incorporating those very early on in any kind of conversation for Muhammad and Rob would be extremely valuable for Stephen too, because that grounds the direction of coaching in a way that is consistent with most organizational strategy. I have a client, I have a student in another course, Core Foundations, but it's not squished into such a short period of time, who has a lot of experience in doing strategic planning across organizations. And one of the suggestions he has made that I think is extremely valuable, when I work with clients, I love to do visuals. And we were talking about this whole goal setting piece, and he said one of the things that he does is, as he's having these conversations, if they're on the phone, he's wandering around with his headset, and he charts out what he is hearing on a whiteboard that's part of his office and aligns it with these SMART goals and draws diagrams and arrows and then takes a picture with his phone and sends it to the client. Now, I thought that was an extremely good idea. And that might be something that our business coaches could find extremely helpful. I'm interested does Muhammad, you're nodding. Do you think that would work for you? Yeah, and it allows you to go back to that visual, to instantly recapture where you have been in that part of the conversation. Okay, so now here's the piece that isn't necessarily present in pure business coaching frames. I suspect it's very present in the counseling world. And it's the piece that we believe is the difference that makes the difference. And that's the motivation. Why is this important to you? Because whether it's coaching or counseling, the underlying purpose of the conversation is that something needs to change. It may be behavioral change, a mental model, whatever. As adults, and depending upon how long whatever processes we've had going for us have sort of imprinted themselves into our brains, making significant change is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
We don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy just the way I am. Thank you very much. So there has to be meaning for me in why I would even want to do this. Mm-hmm. What is the underlying significance of this? Is it going to be something that in my business world is going to make me more effective and therefore better managing my time or my team? Or if it is in a more personal way, is this going to change something in my life? And when we have those conversations, the mind, body, heart alignment, we move into the whole systems thinking that I talked about yesterday. Mm-hmm. So this motivation piece is very, very important. And
Tommy, if I can just add a comment to that. There's some research that shows that across all cultures, religions, across any demographic, that the only times real change occurs is under two circumstances. And one is if you hit rock bottom, and two is if there's enough leverage. And so I think it's really, I think that's where the motivation comes in, is identifying what is the leverage if the change doesn't happen.
You nailed it. Absolutely.
Could you please expand on leverage?
Yeah. I don't know.
Leverage can be the example that they gave, which is a little long, but I think it's worth sharing, is this woman was anorexic and was literally dying from not eating. And the therapist said, you realize you're going to die? And she's like, yeah, I don't care. You realize, was trying to create some pressure to make her understand that she was in a really bad way and her health was in jeopardy. And after trying many different ways of creating leverage, he ended up hitting on something where he said, do you understand that your daughter is going to, walk down the aisle and watch you, at your funeral, and that the husband is going to have a new spouse, and how that's what your daughter is going to be dealing with that. And there was something in the future thinking of her husband being with another woman. That was the leverage that actually made her, it had nothing to do with her eating disorder. It was all about some future vision that she couldn't stand. So it can be as simple as, leverage of my health's in jeopardy to, I'm going to lose my job, to my family's not going to, appreciate this, to something much more psychological. But I think finding what that is for somebody takes a lot of questioning.
Yes, and it takes a lot of courage, because you may have to push on certain things in order for the client, coachee, to even be able to go there. And we have to earn the right to do that. And so I'm back to coaching presence and how we communicate.
Right.
If that question, well, that's interesting. I mean, somebody who really doesn't care about their life, maybe they need a question that is so direct that the client is just kind of thrown back.
Well, they talk about shocking the nervous system in that situation, so that's one extreme. But in a more coaching setting, I think the other word is about pressure. What is the pressure point, the tipping point, where that change needs to happen? Otherwise, there's consequences.
Right. And so when we explore motivation, what we're doing is finding that pressure point. And I have found it extremely helpful in a number of situations we've done this. What are we here for? What do you want to create in your life that you currently don't have? And then we get to starting to create a path forward, and we hit a block. And sometimes I will simply say, and so what will happen if you don't do anything? And in the example that you just offered, the patient probably said nothing. And so the response to that was to paint a picture that the patient found sufficiently disturbing that changed the way she saw her situation. And so, yeah, go ahead, Muhammad. I'm sorry, you were a bit garbled there. Could you ask your question again, sir? Yeah. And that would be a way into, because one of the questions that can come up in this whole awareness and motivation can be around what's the best possible outcome, which addresses that distinction between the pain and the pleasure. So that the motivation piece is very situational. It is tied to the thinking and feeling processes of the client. It's also tied to the expectations of an organization and the resilience of the client. And so one of the things that we really stress in this program is the power of visualization. So I'm in this motivation place, and why does this matter? And I'm invited then to imagine what it will look like, feel like, how it will be different in the future state, and to step into that and recall my example yesterday about the golfer. The more we can encourage our clients to step into an altered state created by the changes that they are going to implement, the deeper the motivation to actually take the first step. And it's the first step on the journey that is always the hardest. And so part of the value of coaching and therapy is that our clients learn that they have a partner in this journey. They're not having to do this all on their own, because any kind of significant change in an adult's life can be huge. It will certainly be disorienting because we're changing a pattern that may be deeply, deeply ingrained. We all have them. You know, the old adage, the glass half empty or the glass half full, that's a complete flip in terms of how we see something. And so working with that with our clients becomes really important. And so what I find works best for me is, having explored the motivation, I will immediately go to this achievement place. I want my clients to experience as deeply as possible the result of the change that has started the conversation in the first place. To see it, to feel it, to look at the result that that's going to create in a whole lot of different ways. And we'll come to that subsequently in terms of looking at our whole lives, because you change one piece, then that has consequences and everything else. And having really explored that and stood in that reality, then go back to the creative planning. So how are you going to make this change? What needs to be happening differently? How will you manage that? And there we can get really specific. For those of you that have a project management orientation, we can talk about milestones and consequences and critical success factors and all that sort of thing that happens in there. And so I just encourage you to see this planning and achievement place almost as a circular thing, because then it becomes easier to support the focus. Because what we know is when we want to make significant change, we've got great ideas. I mean, think of all the people that have wonderful New Year's resolutions and ask them at the beginning of February what happened to them, and well, they sort of fell by the wayside. How do we sustain the change that we want to make? How do we keep focused on it? How do we commit to ourselves that this is really, really important? And then this last sort of crystallizing place. And this may not be part of your therapeutic practice, but I certainly find it a useful coaching tool at the end of a session to ask, so what are you taking away from this conversation? And what are you going to do with that? And there's your homework. So that we begin the next session with, all right, this was your commitment, this was your homework, what happened? And then we go back to the beginning again. So what is the goal for this session? And it may be to recover lost ground. Maybe everything just fell off the table. Okay, how do we get it back on the table? Any comments about this architecture? We call it an architecture because it is a process, and it looks like a whole bunch of pillars. Anybody comment?
I would be interested to hear if anyone from the corporate world could give a perspective of that model.
Is there anything specific you're looking for, or just a general reaction?
I'm not 100% sure, but I know from a therapeutic sense how that would look like. I'm not sure how that would look like in the corporate world, and I would be interested because it would be a different approach that I might take.
At the highest level, I'd say it's really analogous to how you would write a business case for change. Individual and team level, I think these are fundamental steps that, for convenience or lack of education, are often missed. All with the rationale of we're too busy, we have to stuff done. We
I'm
don't have-
sorry, your mic is, I can't hear half of
There's-
your conversation.
There's an
so-
echo. So if you could speak, I don't know if you need to step back from your mic. It just echoes a bit because what you're saying is really important, Stephen.
Yeah,
I would say at the highest level, when we write business cases for change, is this better, by the way?
a
Yes.
little bit,
much
yeah.
better. Thank you.
The logic would be a part of any well-written business case for change transformation.
Yeah,
At the individual and team level, and even at business case writing, most people will skip this either due to lack of education, expedience, or with the mindset that we have to do and we don't have time to reflect and think.
mm-hmm.
Well, I think these are fundamental notions that apply equivalently.
Yeah. And that's where something like the SMART goals have a specific foundation that applies wherever, I think. What do you think, Stephen?
Certainly, again, like things like SMART goals were, very much in vogue probably about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And a longer discussion, but in the last 5 to 6 years, started to throw out the discipline of performance management because it turned into bureaucracy that people don't like. However, the business world is in a bit of a vacuum right now because there are not good answers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Good observation. Yeah. SMART goals are real old hat. And sometimes I think we change terminology and process just because, this is something new and different and it'll work better. But the fact is, particularly in the business world, the bottom line is extremely important. And notice there that the word ethical is included. There's a growing expectation that there will be ethical behavior coming out of organizations, which changes things a lot. How do you balance your SMART goals with ethical conscientiousness and awareness?
Maybe
Okay.
I'll add one last point is that I'm not sure the distinctions that we make between business teams and individuals are all that involving. It can come down to basics like, look, this is work. We all want silver bullets. We want to be able to do one thing and have a miraculous change. And we make excuses and get caught up in day-to-day. Sorry,
Okay. I really appreciate the depth of the various disciplines in this class, and so please always feel free to drop in your observations and where we go with that. So this is one of the diagrams, and I know that Ashna has sent you this in a separate file along with the STAR model. And please, for your own clarity in the process of this course, copy it, have it handy, because we'll come back to it again and again. Now,
Tommy, question.
sure.
On that diagram, I just want to get clear. That diagram is framed as in a session by session viewpoint, right? Goal for the session. Would that be, I'm assuming, my assumption is that is going to be a subset of what is their actual goal for the outcome of this period of coaching. So their overarching goal is going to be one thing. This is going to be then taking that step by step. What is the first piece? We're now working on that first piece and then doing a further breakdown in this session of that first piece, right? If somebody wanted to lose weight, the first step is they're going to change, maybe cut 2 things out of their diet. That might be the first step in one session with homework, and then move on from there. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So this is both a meta picture and a micro picture. This is the big goal, and then, you know, the individual pieces that move along. Was that clear? Good.
That's the way I was interpreting it. I just wanted to make sure I was on the right track.
Yeah, for sure. Good.
And I just want to say, I love this side conversation about the motivation to change, because that is probably, in my point of view, that is probably the most, that's where most of the energy is spent in a lot of therapeutic practice, is actually supporting the client to make continual change, because change is hard.
Yeah.
We avoid discomfort at all costs, and by making change, we are asking ourselves to fully step into the places that feel uncomfortable, and that requires a level of motivation and energy, body and psychic energy, that has to be more important than the discomfort. If we can't override the discomfort or find something that is more important to us, we will abort.
Yep, absolutely. And so the question then often becomes, what will happen if you don't do this? Which is certainly stepping away from, you know, sort of positive psychology, which encourages always to be focused on the strengths in the future and so on. But sometimes that's the jolt that we need. What's going to happen if I don't do this? What's going to happen if I can't manage my team more effectively than I'm doing because we're not getting the results fast enough that the corporation expects? I got to find a way to make this work. Okay. So finding the motivation piece is a lever. And sometimes it's the tough place to go.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have to ask, you know, that tough thing about what's going to happen if I don't do this, it's like identifying critical success factors in the whole project management world that I've lived in for many years. And the critical success factors identify all the things that have to come together for something to really work. So the question, a quick example of the absence of that kind of thinking and the consequence, I was doing a lot of work with a lumber company up in Prince Rupert. And when I went to do some project management with them, we all ended up laughing because they realized that the absence of critical success factor in their case had cost them a lot of money. One of the things they did was helicopter logging, and Prince Rupert is on the coast, and we have tides on the coast, and sometimes those tides are really quite severe. So they had this all lined up with the helicopter loggers were there, and the barges to take the logs and take them down the river out to a ship that was sitting in the port. And they had forgotten to do one thing. They'd forgotten to look at the tide tables. So the logs are on the barges to be towed, but there's not enough water. Because once the logs were all on the barges, they were much deeper in the water than when the logs weren't there. And so they lost an entire day, which cost them a great deal of money. So exploring the motivation and the deeper part of that motivation becomes really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
Any
You brought up a really great point around the shocking the system to ask the different question. And if any of you are familiar with some of the work by Tim Ferriss or Tony Robbins, he does this whole thing around the Dickens process, which is a neuro-linguistic programming exercise, you know, that lasts a good 3 to 4 hours, or I can't even remember how long it is, but really about changing the language in your brain to see the worst case scenario and then the best case scenario. And it's worth the read to around this question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, any other comments, questions about the architecture? Okay, so now let's take another view about this or on this. a simpler view, and an extreme. The awareness piece, what do you want? What do you want to change? What do you want to create? What do you want to build? Whatever. There it is. The beginning piece of the architecture. And then why is this important? What is the meaning of this for you? And it doesn't matter whether we're talking individually in a therapeutic model or corporately in an organizational model. The meaning piece, the motivation piece is extremely important. If, for example, I need to manage a department or manage a team more effectively because I'm aware that I'm not getting the result that I want or the organization expects, this motivation piece is it's the bottom line. What's going to happen if I can't make that change? So it can be a very positive motivation. This is something I want to create in my life and my organization, all that. And the motivation may have a real negative edge to it as well. What's going to happen if I don't? And the example of the anorexic woman is a place of going to that negative place and getting there. Then there's the creative planning. So here's what I need to do. How am I going to do it? How will you do it? And how will you know that you have it? And as I said, my experience has always been that this is a real dance between the future achievement and what it looks like and feels like, the consequences it's going to have. And then that unpacks for me how I need to create the plan, the project plan to get there. And then this focus piece. The impetus to make the change has got to be sufficient to create some energy around staying on track. How will I maintain the focus to do this? One of the things that many people find extremely helpful is to take this STAR model and start to create questions for each piece of the STAR. I even had somebody who decided to make them color-coded on index cards, like the old-fashioned recipe boxes. And anybody that does this has had the same experience, which is, so I've got this sort of deck of cards I've created that speak to questions that will get me traction and awareness, motivation, etc. And what this person said they found extremely helpful was, before a coaching session, to take a few minutes and just kind of go through the cards, sort of like reading your coaching tarot or something. Because what that did was not only remind that person of some good questions, but it also was a process that centered the person in her coaching presence as distinct from the other roles that she had. So one of your pieces of homework from today is to create for yourself some questions that speak to each of these parts of the STAR model. However you want to record that, all index cards are personally very helpful. But there is going to be a piece of homework from today, and my hope is that we'll actually get to the point where you can do some practice in class. And you've been assigned your coaching buddies. One of the big challenges of our intensive program, it has both a positive and negative consequence. The positive consequence is that it requires you to be sufficiently focused on your skill building and your practice that it lands. And the challenge is you don't have much time to do it. So creating the time you need to do your coaching practice has two important consequences. One is that it internalizes for you the skills that you're building And the second is that it's accumulating your coaching practice hours that are part of the requirement for the program. So apart from how busy the rest of your life is, please do everything you can to make sure that your coaching practice hours happen. And it's not just for you, it's for the person who is assigned as your coaching buddy. So there's something we all need to hold in mind. And I appreciate that the pace of the intensive makes it challenging. So this will be probably old hat to many people, particularly in the therapeutic world. But how we live, there are two tools that we have as coaches. One is the questions that we can ask. And the other is how we listen. Now, I asked you yesterday to go away and think about how you know you can trust somebody, and how you know that you don't. Because without trust, we certainly can't get much traction. And the way in which we listen to other people has a huge impact on the extent to which somebody feels they can trust. So, very quickly, internal listening is the place where most of us live a lot of the time. And I think this happens a lot in corporate meetings. Oh, I can remember some that were just horrible. Because we're at a meeting and people are talking, and what's going on in our heads is what we want to say next. So it's internal listening is very me focused. And we can't wait to jump in. And one of the very first things that people need to learn is how to shift out of that. One of the tools that I've shared with clients and students in the leadership faculty was something called the awareness wheel, where I'm doing two things in a meeting. I've got my agenda and on a notebook. On the right-hand side is my agenda and the business of the meeting. The left-hand side is the place where I identify for myself what I am hearing and thinking and feeling and wanting. So I start to distinguish that, and that takes me out of this internal listening where all I'm focused on is what I want to say. Or maybe I've gone off somewhere into the wild blue and I'm not really listening at all. That's the way that most people listen a whole lot of the time. I'm sure as therapists, you know that you don't listen that much. Level 2, what we call focused listening, where I'm listening very much more carefully to what is being said and noticing the tone, the actual language. So I'm really focused on the other person. I'm not focused on myself. So internal listening is precisely that. It's all about me. My focused listening is it's all about you. And that's a laser kind of listening. Whole body listening calls us to pull on all of our senses. I have a coaching colleague who actually teaches a course in body coaching, because she's so convinced that if we can access what we can sense through all of our senses, and all of our physical senses and mental senses and everything, we'll get a much more accurate picture of what's going on. So that's where gut feel lives. What is my gut feel? What am I hearing here? It's way beyond the words. And then this last one, listening to silence. An example might be in your series of coaching conversations, you notice that whenever a particular kind of thing comes up, your client just backs off and stops. And so if we've earned the right and we're trusted, we can say things like, I can't help but notice that when we go to that particular topic, you sound as if you're really uncomfortable or there's something coming up. Can you tell me a little bit about that? So along with the levels of listening goes as well the whole question of tone, how we ask those questions, and being self-aware of how I am listening, which calls us back to how do we step into that place of conscious listening? Because we go about our days, well, of course we're listening, da 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 da. Well, what are we listening to? Are we listening to what is being said, or is this all about what's going on in my head? Now, any comments about that? Okay. So, yes.
Just two comments, lovely things that my prof told me at one time, is read the text of the client and lead by following. So it's just that presence, that awareness of listening. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I like that. Would you say that again? Read the text of the client.
Yeah, read the text of the client and lead by following. Yeah.
Very, very nice. I want to write that down. Read the text of the client and lead by following. Okay. Now, all this starts to be unpacked. Pages 17, 18, and 19 in your text. So have a really good look at that. For some of you, this may be old hat. And for others, I expect it will be a slightly different perspective. Traditionally, we don't worry terribly much in the corporate world about how we listen. But what we know in terms of standing in coach position and actually facilitating change is that we need to learn to listen very deeply. So I'm curious, Robert and Mohammed and Stephen, what's your comment on this whole listening piece? Hello? Yes. Yep. Okay, good. I'm glad you brought up the mobiles and the laptop thing, because it connects interestingly to the whole concept of flow. There have been a number of organizations who intentionally have created agreements with their people that when they come to work, they will essentially disengage their mobiles and not use them at all during the course of the day. Now that, for many people, is just about like cutting off a limb the consequence of this has been fascinating. Where creativity is an important aspect of the culture of an organization. So one of the examples was a pretty technical organization where they were working on new solutions, creative solutions for in a technical environment. Once people agreed to try to do this, to live without their cell phones at the ready, there were some significant changes. Not only were there better results, people were less stressed, healthier, enjoyed being at work because they were focused, and they were experiencing an accelerating level of flow as they really got into what they were doing and had all the good things that come along with that. So that changes the whole way we operate together. Trying to get people to disengage from their phones is a huge undertaking, particularly for millennials who seem to be actually born with a phone in their hand. So anything we can do to deepen our capacity to listen more effectively, and to be more time efficient with meetings. I don't know whether you've ever seen Cleese, I can't remember his first name, did one of these very amusing but absolutely dead on videos, Meetings, Bloody Meetings. And most organizations need to look at that. So any other comments about this? One of the things that some people find effective as they try to improve their listening skills is to check in with themselves on a regular basis. How am I listening? Or actually, have I been sitting in this conversation and wondering about what I need to cook for dinner or whatever? The good news is we can multi-process. The bad news is we can multi-process. And in coaching, counseling, whatever, the more focused we can be, the better result we can have. Okay? All right. So, are you there, Bella?
Yes, of course. Hi.
Hi. So Bella was doing something in the interest of this exercise. Bella is our new training assistant for the rest of our program. Eli will turn up from time to time. So here is your first practice session. You will be assigned pairs, and it'll be the same pairs that you've been assigned as your coaching buddy. I want you to please use the STAR model as your structure to practice the active listening, where you're focused on what's being said to you and not what's going on in your head. This may be old hat to the therapist, but play along with us, please. And what you will need to do, each of you, in this exercise is to specify a goal. It might be something fairly small, but you need a goal, and you will exchange roles. So this is a quick exercise, 5 minutes. You're coach for 5 minutes, client for 5 minutes, switch roles, and you do that and come back that will be 20 minutes at the most. So Bella, will you make the assignments to the breakout rooms, please?
Oh, Sue, I have a little technical difficulty here this morning. Would you try to have me as a host of this meeting, or would you be able to break the room?
Okay, all right. What I need to do then is
Meanwhile, I can just refresh. I can announce the pairings for today. As Eli mentioned in their emails, that the pairing has been done by him yesterday, and I just wanted to read out again. So Maria will be with Steve, Stefan with Danielle, and Melanie with Barbara, and Mohammed will be with Kathleen, and Robert will be with Sandra. Everyone okay with this pairing? I think we have everyone attending this morning, so this should work. If not, then let me know. We'll make some arrangement for you.
Yeah, so the thing I'm having some difficulty with is making you a host for this.
Okay.
Did Eli tell you how to do that?
Yes. So would that be okay? You break in the room this morning and then we figure it out?
No, I need you to do it, please.
Oh, okay. Sure. So then if you could go training group 2, then if you right click on that, would you see like status, host or non-host?
No, that's for some reason that is not coming up for me because I know how it's supposed to work.
Yes.
And we needed them in pairs, not fours. So that is not going to work very well.
I think you just did the break room though, not?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Oh, never mind that. I just saw the function just work.
Okay, but the lineup here for the breakout rooms has more people than 2. They're supposed to be just in dyads. Okay, we're going to have to do this differently. Shoot.
Showing me breakout room 3 at the moment.
I'm sorry?
I'm seeing hosts is inviting me to join breakout room 3 at the moment.
Yeah, I've got 2.
Okay.
Two.
So see what happens when you go there, because there's something not.
Hi, Mohammed. Hi, how are you? Yes, I can.
Please do ignore me here. I'm trying to do something. Sorry, guys.
No problem at all. I'm just trying to go back to one. Okay, so I don't think I can see the actual task. It's about having a goal and then, and then go through questions through the STAR model. And I think. Yeah, me too. Which, yes, I just wanted to ask which role would you like to take? Okay, okay, I will try, yes. Okay, what would be the goal that you would like to work on? Just think of any goals that you would like. Anything you want to change. Okay. Well, all right. So in terms of yeah. So sorry. Why would this be important for you? So why is it? Why do you think it will help you? Or yeah, why is it important? Why do you find it meaningful to do this? Sorry, Mohammed. It's just sorry. Just I have an error message saying that in 48 seconds the room will close. So I don't know. There is no way. Bella, can you help, please? It says that our room is gonna close.
Yes, so Sue just decided to bring everyone back in the main room. So
Ah,
would that be possible to wrap it up and come back?
oh,
Yeah, thank you so much.
no, it's okay. We will come back to the room, no? Because in half a minute there is nothing we can do. Yeah, okay. We'll continue after. So it's self-development and so on. We will continue after.
We're doing or attempting to do was just a quick practice session with the STAR model. So what we need is someone to agree to be the coach using the STAR model and someone to be the client. Who will step up to that very quickly?
I can be a client.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Who will be a coach?
I'll step in.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, go for it. And we are listening. We're looking through the lens of the STAR model.
Okay. So okay, go ahead as the client.
Okay, so what I would like to focus on is learning how to drop a few balls in my life. I have scheduled my life to within an inch of collapse. I would like to be able to carve time out for me.
Okay, so there was two ways I was thinking that we could look at that. One would be, what if in this moment we were able to look at all the balls and you just let them drop on the table? Like, what is the consequences of everything dropping? People won't get fed, etc., etc. So
Okay.
Hey now.
So clients can't be dropped, students can't be dropped. I have an ethical obligation. I have contractual obligations. My family can't be dropped. They're too important to me, and so I keep the balls running. And so if I let everything drop, I would lose my livelihood. I would have to work through the process with my family, which I can, but the other two are too difficult to envision. The students and the clients.
So yeah, I understand there's a priority with scheduling. I just wanted to focus on, your family is so important. I understand that. But what I'm hearing is that you don't have access to that. It's kind of like out of control. If they were important, that wouldn't be an issue. It would be free flowing. You would feel as though you were seeing them and it would be fine. So there's an issue with what you're giving them or what you're receiving. I'm getting a little bit therapeutic here perhaps, but it really resonates with me that you feel as though you're not, there's some disconnect with your family life.
The disconnect potentially is that they come last because of the other requirements that must come first, and I feel guilt around them coming last and always having to kind of scrunch for those family days and family dinners. And so I have guilt around that. So that stops me from dropping that ball. and you know, there was incredible meaning for me around being able to have my friends and my family around me and spend time with.
Is there a way that you could describe when you see them to me and when you don't see them? You know, when is it that you don't see them, and what's that quality like? You know, do you see them every day?
No.
Do you have dinner with them every day?
No.
When do you see them? Just on holidays, or?
So I see them for a family dinner every month where the whole family comes together in my house, and I see my 2 children and my grandchildren as often as I can. We all live in the same city. So I think for me, it has the motivation for me here would be to find a way of having quality time as opposed to quantity time.
So could you not have, is it possible to have quality time with those dinners? Is there a way that you can prioritize your sense of wellness when you're with them on that occasion? Right? Can you be there for the moment and just, wow, I've got this one day and this is going to be a beautiful dinner?
I've taken steps towards that, which is instead of cooking for 30, I ask everyone to bring a dish, and so it's potluck. What I haven't asked for yet is support around cleaning up afterwards, and so we're kind of left with a lot of cleaning up. So that's one place where I could have quality time afterwards.
Yeah, I think it's really important with all the things that we do in our life. I mean, our family are very, very important. And if it is that moment that you could say, okay, make those shifts and sit with your son or sit with your daughter and really get that quality time, if that's all that you have, to really enjoy that time that you do have with them. And then that perhaps there is more of a satisfaction in that meeting, that gathering, rather than
I can do that. I can set a time actually before the dinner, possibly to have time with both my daughter and my son. I see them more often than just that once a month dinner, and so potentially what I could do is set a time, you know, where just the 2 of them can come over for dinner more often, as opposed to focusing everything on that one big monthly family dinner.
Yeah. Are we going longer? Sorry, but is that good?
Just what would be your next question, Barbara? Because you've gone through awareness and motivation and some creative planning.
Yeah.
And the description includes some achievement. So then the last piece is how you will focus, Maria, on actually making this change.
So can I ask a question about the focus? Is
Sure.
the focus around how will I take the step, or is the focus around how will I be in the process? Can I ask that question?
Sure. And I would say it's both.
Okay. And so how I can is we have a Facebook page for our family dinner where everybody, you know, talks about the next family dinner and blah, blah, blah. So I could post on there that I am wanting to make changes. Is everyone okay with, you know, creating some changes around cleanup? That's the one piece. The other piece would be to talk to both of my kids and find out if we can do a family dinner, just us, but instead of just having it haphazard where we struggle to figure that out, that we actually set a date each month where just the 2 of them come over instead of, you know, I can, you know, them showing up is great, but I want to have consistent and conscious time with them.
Okay. So you have demonstrated some very clear steps that you can take to maintain your focus. I quake at the idea of of that many people that have to come. Thank heaven. I live in relative isolation on my island. The kids are over on Vancouver Island, and we have to make a real effort to go and.
Shall we therapize the reasons you might be on the island?
That would be interesting, Steve. I'm quite sure it has something to do with the quiet and the isolation. But the purpose of the exercise was well demonstrated. You were clear about what it was that you were aware of, that you wanted to change, and why that was important. You came up with an approach. A family Facebook page is quite the idea. My goodness. And 30 people for dinner just leaves me aghast. But anyway, my hat is off to you, Maria, big time. I'm sure that you and Steve don't have a whole lot of fun cleaning up after all that.
We might soon.
And there was the achievement, the result there was that the connection that you wanted to maintain with your family members would still be achieved, but in a different way, in a way that shared the responsibility and allowed for you to be fully present, and you had a plan going forward. How did you feel about that conversation, Maria?
It felt really good because the knowing is in me. I understand the difficulties, and I have the knowing about how to move through those difficulties to achieve our goal. However, to actually put it out of my head and give it to someone else to work with this model felt really empowering for me, to give it to someone, to let someone else hold it for me for a moment and feed it back to me. That felt really empowering, actually.
I love the way you just described that, giving it to someone else to hold. And what I heard was Barbara picking up on that.
Yeah.
And you were able to, she said she was hearing some guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a place where the level of listening goes deep. And as coach or therapist, we have the opportunity to offer what we're hearing. Mm-hmm. Now, you might have said, well, no, it has nothing to do with guilt. It's altogether something else. But she landed through her listening and experience on this place. Maybe it's a mother place. Maybe I don't have enough of it in my own psyche. But I hope that the purpose of the exercise actually, I think, worked out better than having you in the breakout rooms, but we'll get that sorted out because we've been able to see the process and the different levels of listening. Now, I'd like to hear some observations from other people, particularly Robert and Mohammed and Stephen, to listen to that conversation.
Look, I'm going to jump in straight away. I think I found it very difficult to. The internal listening was going on as I was watching the scenario play out. So I was kind of second guessing where the next question was going. Look at the STAR model, and I think the challenge for me, and this is something I identified when I first started reading material on coaching, is more sell, less tell, and more facilitating a person to achieve their own realizations. So I think that was something that was well illustrated in that exercise, but it's certainly something that I've made a personal observation on, not wanting to run in. And I think possibly it's a guy thing, if I'm not stereotyping it too far, that you bring us a problem or a challenge and you want to vent and we want to find a solution. Let's put it in a little box and there we go. It's all sorted out and packed away. But that's certainly something that I'm going to have to become more aware of.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for being so open about all of that, Rob. Mohammed, what's your observation? All right. So thank you for being that transparent. And what it points to is the importance of getting out of that internal listening where all of that is going around in my own head. What am I going to say? Blah, 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 blah. And becoming quite focused on what the person is saying and standing in the moment, and letting everything else just go away. And through our practice in the course of the program, I think you'll start to become more comfortable with that. But I fully appreciate that in your context, that would feel like a real stretch. So have faith. We'll get you to that place where you can function in 2 or 3 different ways, even simultaneously. Stephen, do you have any comment you could make?
I relate to the comments that have been made so far, so I don't think I have much to add.
Okay. So, good work today, everybody. Please arrange for your coaching buddy practice as quickly as you can. And let's do a very quick round. What are people taking away from our class today? 2 words only. Melanie?
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. 2 things. I really honestly adore the architecture flowchart and the 5-star model, the star model. I'm a huge color-coded checklist girl, so this puts it into a really condensed 2-pager. I know more than 2 words, but that was the 2 things.
Okay, so now your opportunity is to start creating questions for yourself for each level of the STAR model, which is the other part of people's homework. Sandra, what are you taking away today?
Hi.
I've been watching your face. You looked a little puzzled some of the time. Is it a translation issue for you?
No, maybe I was just thinking processing what was happening. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I understand the architecture and the star much better now than when I was looking at it before.
Good.
And yeah, I think those 2 things.
Thank you. And Sandra, if there's ever a point where you need some further exploration that has to do with language, just say so. We'll work on that. No problem.
Thank you.
Barbara, what are you taking away?
A huge sense of momentum. Very, very feels like a good flow.
Great. Good. Danielle?
I love the demonstration. I think that's the best way that I learn, is to be able to see that demonstration, and yeah, I find that really effective.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that observation, because I'm coming to the conclusion that demonstration is often more effective than breakout room practice.
Especially the ability to debrief it,
yeah,
and see how perhaps the learnings that come from it are really important.
Okay, thank you for that observation, Danielle. That's extremely helpful to me. Robert?
You asked for 2 words: architecture and listening.
Okay. I hope that the architecture is a good word for you there.
The architecture, just about the model. That's so that there's a process.
Okay, good. And do you prefer Robert or Rob?
Rob is good.
Okay, I'll remember that.
Otherwise, I think I'm in trouble.
Oh God, yes. You had a father like mine then.
It was my mother.
Or your mother. Okay, got it. Steve, what are you taking away?
Me, the architecture model, which is fabulous in the way my brain works. And also, it is now obvious my need to practice.
We'll give you lots of opportunity. Maria?
It was very interesting that I really enjoyed giving it over to Barbara, and I was also conscious of time and wanting to move through it quickly. So that's my own personal piece around, over functioning. So I wanted to facilitate myself in the process too.
Yeah. Oh, dear. I wonder if there's a professional woman in the world who doesn't have to struggle with overtime.
And so
I've never met one.
And so that momentary giving it over felt really good. And thank you, Barbara. I really enjoyed the process and thank you for doing that.
Okay, thank you. Katalin.
Same as everyone else, I really like the architecture model. It looks very useful, and also the levels of listening.
Okay, good. And Mohammed? Good. And if you don't have the time or whatever to actually get them laminated, just have a fairly stiff plastic sleeve and put them in back to back. Works really well. Stephen, what are you taking away?
Maria's reflection on the exercise I enjoyed. That was very valuable for me. But I would look forward to also doing the breakout rooms.
Yes. Well, that'll get organized. Don't worry. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We've managed to end on time. Go into your days or nights or whatever, and may they be everything you want. And I will see you in the morning. Thank you. Bye for now.
Can I just ask a quick question before everyone exits?
Sure, Rob. Go ahead.
Just to clarify on the 15 hours coaching exercise, we scheduled a call this morning with our coaching buddies group, and we were just kind of going from there to plan towards looking and seeing what we would need to do in order to get through the process in the 4 weeks that we have. And if we're looking at 15 hours, that's roughly 4 hours per week. When we do the logging, if we're talking about 4 hours per week, that's 4 hours per coach per coachee. So that's eight hours. Am I correct?
Yes. And you have 3 months after the course is over to complete your coaching practice. Because the big challenge with the intensive is to actually try and keep up the practice with the intensity of the course.
Yeah.
So do the best you can, make sure your log is up to date, and you will almost for sure have, well, everybody does, but particularly after an intensive, need more time for practice hours.
And Sandra is obviously, she's very, very, she's carved herself out some time, as have I. So she was like really keen to make sure that we can put enough time into it. So I think that's not a challenge potentially between us. Just in terms of the process, if we're looking at a coaching process, and this talks to the question that I had earlier on, defining the topics and that, are we looking at, Steve actually brought it up that there's a micro perspective and a macro perspective, the meta side as well.
The last part of what you said, Rob, got garbled. What? Could you repeat the last part?
About carrying through. I mean, is there any stuff, or should we look at it as an extended process?
You could do either. If you're working with the same coaching buddy for a while, there's an excellent opportunity to have the same topic go through a number of sessions. So do whatever is most valuable for you. Does that answer your question?
No, that's fine. That's all right. That's great. I'll have a chat with Sandra and then see how we go.
Yeah. Okay. Any other
Good.
questions?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes, certainly. I can always spare the moments, Mohammed. Mhm. Oh, what an interesting question. You've landed on the critical issue there. If you want to have your practice time include people outside of the class, then you are going to have to assure confidentiality and have a disclaimer. So I think, at least initially, it's probably better to focus on the practice with your coaching colleagues in this class, and then a little further on, branch out to we encourage you to go. I mean, you've got 5 hours of coaching to do with people outside the class. That would be a wonderful opportunity to pursue what you've just described. And yes, you will need disclaimers. Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Are there any other questions from anybody?
Just following on from Mohammed's question, just to say, in terms of that, would you say leave it, because we don't have the architecture down or any of that, leave it for sort of the last week? Because I've already spoken to somebody that might like to do the experiential, help me with my experiential for the 5 hours. But your experience, say, hang out until the end?
Well, I would take your listen to your own internal voice. If you feel ready to do that, I think you've got a wonderful opportunity to begin with somebody and actually get some traction in the process of the 4 weeks we have together. So if you feel up to it, Rob, I'd say go for it.
I definitely say not this week. Just listening to that session, I was like, whoa, it's okay. Yeah, I'm glad someone else put their hand up. I was very impressed.
Okay, good. And
thank you very much.
Everybody, if you feel as if you're wading into deep water, get in touch with me. I'm quite happy to wade with you. I'm excited by everybody in this group. And so, yeah, we've got a wonderful journey ahead. Okay, thanks. Anybody else? You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Okay.
We'll see you in the morning.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.